Hi, everyone. So for the next 20 minutes, what I would like to do is to step back and then step forward. So I would like to paint the picture that I see the digital world is right now. Where does API fit? And also, how do I see APIs will be in the future and what we need to do as a community on that. So the way I see that is the digital world right now is revolving around 3 A's: apps, APIs, and AI. And out of those, AI is probably the most overloaded term. There is not one AI. We'll talk to that later. But before that, anyone has any idea which A is the oldest one and which is the newest? APIs are the? AI is the oldest one. Okay. APIs. Okay, so we have between, so no one thinks apps are the oldest. That's true. Actually, and again, depends how you see, right? APIs are probably the oldest one in the context that we are going to talk about. Interestingly, the API specs were created before APIs. But hold on to that. And also, I'll probably contradict myself, right? Because I'll switch between APIs and AIs, because it depends how we see it. But to start things off, let's see with a concrete example in our daily lives. Why did I say that the world is revolving around these 3 A's: apps, APIs, and AI? So my best friend in London, Ashok, he lives around 10 miles from my place. And every Saturday between 5 and 7, I meet him, right? So I have a requirement. I want to visit Ashok. How does my life, my digital and organic life starts there? What I'll do is I'll take off my phone. I'll open up an app, let's say an Uber app. That's where my app journey starts. What I want is I want to go to Ashok, but my journey starts with that app. I'll open Uber app. Then what will happen is I'll enter Ashok's address. He lives in Amersham, around 10 miles from my place. I'll enter Ashok's address, but then Uber needs to do mapping services right now. Uber could do mapping, but they don't want to. That's not their core functionality. What they'll do is they will need another digital service to do mapping, Google Maps. So Google Maps is specialized in mapping. They need that to find the location, to find the route, to find the distance, and so on, right? So what will happen is now Uber as a digital service will use the Google Maps APIs, the second A comes in, to pull in the mapping information, to get the route, to get the distance, etc., right? Now, Uber needs to tell me how much it's going to cost me, including all the strange, those search pricings, right? What will Uber now do is, Uber will use AI, and this is where I was saying AI is the most kind of overloaded term. I used AI first time in 1999. So it was a completely different AI than what we see right now, and it was not basically, of course, ChatGPT didn't exist at that time. I'll talk about that in a second, but for now, let's come back there. So what Uber needs to do is, Uber needs to figure out that what is the pricing based on the distance, route, etc., and the search pricing, right? So it will use an AI. This is predictive AI. They need to predict the price that it should cost based on the traffic, based on the route, based on the distance. And that's how this, let's say, digital service, which is Uber, will deliver me a service saying that, hey, this is how much it's going to cost, right? This is how any of the digital service that you can pick from the consumer space or in the enterprise space, this is how the digital world works right now. Resonating between these 3 A's. Let's just zoom into some of those. Let's start with the first A, apps, applications. I think no one said apps is the oldest one. Apps is not. Still, it's pretty old, right? So the first app store, I have been in telecom for my whole life almost. I remember the first app store was in 2003. I don't even remember the name of that app store. But I remember in 2006, there was an app store that came out. It was called Hindalco. It was for the Sony Ericsson P800 and P900s. And then the Nokia catalog came in for the Symbian smartphones. But something significant happened in 2008, which was the launch of the Apple App Store. And then the app revolution happened, right? And there was a saying, I'm sure probably some of you may have heard, that there is an app for everything, right? I remember I was working for Vodafone Group in London at that time, and it was, I believe, was 2003, 2004, when 3G was getting rolled out, right? And this app ecosystem, Apple iPhone has not launched yet, this app ecosystem was just coming up. And then we did a brainstorming session in the leadership team to basically everyone needed to say, what do you want from an app? And we were given this sticky Post-it notes, right? I remember I wrote down, I want my app to make coffee. And I put it on the, whatever, the sticky whiteboard. I laughed, everyone laughed. Why do you want and how can an app do? So it was probably a joke. 10 years from that day, and this was 2003, 10 years from that day, I joined my next endeavor, GSMA. I walk into the coffee place, there is no coffee machine. There is a tablet with an app, you press that, it makes coffee. So we need to, be careful of what we are wishing. So apps has been there in our daily lives from, every single thing, right? It's the journey that we take on a daily basis. Interestingly, in 2010, I remember the word of the year was applications. Let's come back to APIs. As I was mentioning, the way, it depends on how you see it. APIs are probably the oldest one, right? I remember in 1940, of course I was not born there, but I remember from one of the books that I read was the API specification was written before even the term API was coined. So there was these two researchers from University of Cambridge in UK. They were working on the EDSAC, which was one of the first von Neumann computer. And they were working on subroutines. It was not called APIs, right, but similar to that. And interestingly, those subroutines was punched in punch tapes. And they needed to know how those subroutines work. So they created handwritten notes. That became the first API specification. And then they actually wrote a book, which is a very, very interesting book. So the API specification came, the year was 1940 when it came in, right? But the API, application programming interface as a word, came in 1974. I'm sure many of you have done engineering. And when I was doing my engineering, one of my favorite things, at that time it was relational database, RDBMS systems, right? One of the book was CJ-DATE, if anyone remembers, right? So CJ-DATE is actually the one who introduced this term, application programming interface, or APIs. And I remember one statistics, I think it was in 2019, Akamai reported that 83% of all internet traffic, 83% is actually APIs. And for a reason, right? Because why the internet was seeing so much of traffic for APIs? It was collaboration. Like the Uber and Google Maps example, one service cannot just work on their own unless they create the entire stack, right? So they need to collaborate. And that's why APIs were created, so that digital services can talk to each other using the language of the APIs. Now let's come to the last A, AI. And as I was saying, AI is not one AI, right? AI has taken a long journey. As I was mentioning earlier, first time I used AI was in 1999. And I was in India at that time. And then it was to extract out information from handwritten legal documents. And I was using frameworks like Omnimark and Prolog. They probably don't even exist at the moment. And I failed miserably. It didn't work because there was not enough compute, right? Although in 99, you may know that NVIDIA actually introduced their first GPU, the GeForce 256. But that was for small gaming devices. It was not for basically using in AI. I mean, it happened recently. In 2009, I remember there was a paper published by Andrew Young where they said that GPU should be used. But in 2012, when the backpropagation was introduced in AI, that's where GPUs were introduced. Anyways, so AI has started from predictive AI, then it moved into generative AI, then to agentic AI, and then something is happening. I'll come to that a bit later. And as someone was saying that AI is the oldest, and again, it depends how you see it, right? As I said, API spec was created in 1940. AI, the term was introduced in 1956. If you know the Dartmouth workshop, only 11 people in the world, they actually shaped what we are seeing right now. And John McCarthy was the person who organized that workshop. and then named it as AI, artificial intelligence. But the first neural network was created even before that. It was in 1951. But this is why I said I'll contradict myself. If you know, even in generative AI, the entire, let's say, revolution happened after that famous paper in 2017, the transformer paper from Google. The transformer is an implementation of it's basically is a deep learning system, right? For deep learning, if you know backpropagation, without backpropagation, deep learning was not really working. In 2012, Geoffrey Hinton is attributed to be, kind of contributing towards backpropagation. He didn't invent it. But backpropagation is actually an implementation of Leibniz chain rule. And when did Leibniz introduce it? 1676. So it depends how you see it. But let's proceed in that journey, right? We started from where it came from. I said that the way the digital world can be, seen as oscillating between these 3 years. Another way to look into the digital world is the entire world has been oscillating between 2 paradoxes. One is called the Moravec's paradox. The other one is called Polanyi's paradox, right? So Hans-Peter Moravec from Carnegie Mellon in 1988, he provided this paradox. What he said is, there are certain tasks which are very difficult for humans but easy for computers. A cube root of 108-digit number, very difficult for me and you as humans, right? Very easy for computers. But there are tasks which are very easy for humans but difficult for computers. Language. Language is the thing. Language has got all sorts of ambiguities, right? Language is extremely difficult to interpret, and that was difficult for computers. And what Polanyi said is the same thing in a different way. What Polanyi said is, we know more than what we can express. And that has been a restriction to our entire, let's say, digital journey. Because when you are writing a, let's say, program or you are creating an API spec, what you're doing is you're solving in your head first. What should be the schema of that API spec? What should be that code doing? You're solving in your head, then you are basically encoding it in whatever language or whatever, it's a JSON schema, or that's what you're doing, right? What Polanyi said is, we know more than we can express, which means whatever is in our head, we can't really express. The problem was language. These machines didn't understand our language, and we didn't understand their language as well. And this was generative AI. Predictive AI moved into generative AI. Generative AI is extremely different to predictive AI. It uses completely different tools. This is not about AI, so we'll not get into details in there. So let me ask it may sound very, very absurd question, right? If I ask, what is the shape of the organic world? There could be two answers, which will be, poles apart. One answer could be there is no shape. Why are you asking for the shape of this organic world? Or you will say 3D, three-dimensional, right? Now, if I ask the same question, what is the shape of this digital world? It may sound absurd, but it's not. Let me give that answer. It's rectangular. Why do I say that? The access to the digital world is through a screen. Your laptop screen, your phone screen, your tablet screen. That's why the shape of the digital world for us has been a rectangular. But that's not what we wanted, right? That's what the digital system has been provided to us because we didn't know how to use the language of the machines. Machines didn't know our natural languages. That's why we were interacting through that screen. But things were about to change. This is the digital singularity that we are facing right now. With the generative AI and the large language model, that language barrier has been shattered. The machines understand our language right now. So in that case, what is the significance of that? The significance is the 3 A's that I talked about, apps, APIs, and AIs, they are converging into one single digital singularity. Okay, let me go back to the initial example that I talked about. My requirement hasn't changed. I still want to go to Ashok, but now I don't need to open up that app. What I need to do is, I just need to say what I want. I will just say, hey, I want to go to Ashok, right? And the agent, doesn't matter which device that agent is, in a phone, in another device, it will figure out what I'm talking about. If there is an ambiguity, because language is ambiguous, if there are multiple Ashoks in my address book, it will come, hey, do you want to go to Ashok who lives in Amasham? Because it's Saturday, 5 o'clock, that's where you generally go. Then I will say yes. Then it will figure out what to do, whether to call Uber or to Bolt, which is in London. Or if that agent knows that I am very, very sensitive towards, let's say, sustainability, and my carbon credit is already been consumed for the day, it may say, hey, your carbon footprint has been consumed, or carbon credit has been consumed, please use the train, right? So in that case, what's happening is, there is no apps. APIs, I'll come to that later. AI is a completely different set of APIs, but more importantly, these three A's are converging into one single digital singularity, and it has got implications to everything we do, including APIs. So let me do some kind of strong and bold predictions across these three A's. First, apps will cease to exist. Apps will die, and it's not theory. The example that I talked about, that I want to go to Ashok, in 2023 in CES, Consumer Electronics Show, which happens in Vegas in January, they launched two devices. One was the Humane AI pin, which didn't work that well due to commercial reason. The other device was called Rabbit R1. Anyone can buy it. I don't know if anyone has seen this or not. I pre-ordered it, I had it, and the experience is exactly same as I talked about. The experience that I talked about, where I said, hey, I want to go to a show, is not a made-up one. That's an experience that I am getting from Rabbit R1. In Rabbit R1 device that you carry in your pocket, it looks a bit ugly. It's orange, like the new iPhone 17 orange thing. You keep it in your pocket, and you talk to it. I say, hey, I want to go to Ashok. It talks back. There's a screen as well there, and there's a camera as well, because it sees what you see, right? So that thing is happening already. There is no apps, but the digital services are there, right? Now, let's come to APIs. This is where we are all here, right? As I am saying, application is going to die is a strong word. It's going to cease to exist, or the applications will move towards a non-screen modality, where there will not be any screens, right? Programming has already changed. We all talk about vibe programming, vibe coding. We heard this morning programming is done by all these agents and so on. So if in API, the first two letters A and P are changing, how can API remain the same, right? So APIs are going to be transformed heavily. So the way I see the APIs, I have spent last 20 years in APIs in the telecom world. I wrote the first API specification from the telco in 2008. But I see that APIs are going to change drastically. Why? Because what's happening is now, why APIs existed? Because of two different systems were collaborating between each other. They had a language, and that was very strict. There were strict endpoints. There was strict schema. For example, the Uber case I was talking about. Who decided to call Google Maps? It was the developer, designer of Uber service decided that, right? In the agentic world, that's not going to happen. The agents will decide, they will express intent. They need to understand intent. They need to negotiate intent. They need to be context aware. So this fixed endpoint-based model is not going to work. They need to evolve into cognitive interfaces. So even the term API probably will cease to exist. I call it cognitive interface. The I will remain same. Has anyone heard about this Gibberlink thing that happened earlier this year? If you have not, Google it. You will be amazed. Let me tell you what does that mean, right? So this happened in February this year. Later they revealed that this was an experimental setup. So basically 2 AI agents. One was a personal agent from someone. I forgot his name. Let's call him Peter, right? There was another agent from a salon. So this guy, let's say Peter, wanted to book the appointment from this salon. So basically his personal agent called up that salon, and this agent didn't know that the other end as well is an agent. So he said, hey, I want to book an appointment for Peter. That other end, the salon agent, says, that's great. I am the salon agent. So then Peter's agent said, oh, you are agent as well. Why do we need to talk humans language? Let's switch to Gibberlink. And what is Gibberlink? Gibberlink is a very optimized sound-based protocol. It's called GGWave. It uses 4 bits. which we humans cannot understand. So who decided which interface to use? These agents decided. And it's scary and interesting at the same time. Scary because we don't understand what that is, right? If these agents start to define their own APIs, own interfaces, how will we know what they're talking about? They may be talking bad about us. And lastly, AI. AI will take a big leap, right? So AI has moved from predictive AI to generative AI to agentic AI. And now we are hitting a data wall in AI, right? So let me tell you what do I mean by that. All these frontier LLMs are generally trained with number of tokens, which is 2 times 10 to the power 13, right? So each token is around 3 bytes, so it's 6 times 10 to the power 13 bytes. It's a huge amount of data, almost as the size of the internet, right? So we are hitting that, let's say, data wall. But more importantly, let's say if I put a small kid in this table and then try to pull that kid, what will happen is that kid will resist. That kid will resist to kind of, that doesn't fall down. How does that kid know that it will fall down? It's about the gravitational force. That kid has no clue what gravitational force is, has not read any books, right? Have we encoded all this knowledge that when you pull, the person will, fall down in any books? These are not documented anywhere, but still we humans learn, right? But that GenAI model or Agentic AI model, they don't know it. They have no idea how does these things work, right? This is where now Agentic AI is moving into physical AI, where we have hit the data wall, because everything that is written is being read by these models and the agents, but there are many things, a lot of knowledge which is not yet written. So to finish with, before that, I'll just say one thing quickly. I talked about Polanyi's and Moravec's paradox earlier, right? I think I was wrong, or my ambition has changed. I thought Moravec and Polanyi were talking about language. I don't think they were talking about language. There's still, whatever they were saying is valid. There are many things which are easy for us, very difficult for computers. That kid sitting here pulling it is a classic example. So we still have a lot to do, right? APIs need to evolve to facilitate that. MCP is a start. MCP is, I think, is a workaround where all these digital services are toolified, right? But that's not going to solve what the agents want. The agents need cognitive interfaces. They need to express intent, understand intent, and negotiate intent. So to end with, what do we need to do? I think it's easy. I call it ABC. The first thing is we need to acknowledge this digital singularity. This is happening. This is not theory. This is not PowerPoint. This is not talk. This is happening. I have seen it since 2023, that Rabbit R1 example that I gave. The next thing is, let's start to build anything, APIs, apps, whatever we build, considering that the screens will go away. The screens will cease to exist. If I need to predict, between 2 to 5 years, screens will cease to exist. So anything that we build, if we are building an API, in that case, we assume that there is a screen behind the app that will cease to exist. Let's build for that. And let's build the APIs considering they need to be more cognitive. So instead of fixed endpoint, fixed schema-based things, let's build it as cognitive interfaces. And at the end, I just want to leave with this thought. So, when there is a wind of change happening, some people build walls. And this is a very nice proverb I heard earlier. And some people build windmills. I prefer to build windmills, and I'm sure many of you will do so as well. So let's build the future together. Thank you.